Hi, this is Rhonda Hutchison with Dallas Joomla User Group. This is a re-recording of the Google part of the meeting presentation at our January meeting. I apologize to everyone who had to sit through elevator music purgatory until we figured out our broadcasting problem. In this recording, I'm incorporating some of the discussion points from the on-site participants, so hopefully this will convey all the info that was missed if you didn't catch the beginning of the meeting because of our technical issues. All right. In the second part of the meeting, the section on OpenStreetMaps was successfully broadcast and recorded, so you can find a link to that video on our website at joomladallas.org. All right, now let's go ahead and dive in. Google Maps has become top of mind for website owners the last few months because they started seeing this on their sites. Yikes. Suddenly, map embeds that stopped working, that used to work, stopped working. And why did this happen? Because Google decided to monetize it. If you have this error on your website, it's because what was once free is no longer free. So, are you going to have to pony up and hand Google your credit card to get your site's map working again? Well, maybe, but maybe not. There is still quite a bit that you can do with Google Maps that is still free. So, let's look at a few. Okay, let's first look at map URLs. What are these? So these are links that call to a free map API, and by when you set these up, you choose certain types of options and parameters, and we'll walk through some of those. Now, one thing before we get into it, I want you to realize about the links is that it's, of course, not the same as an embed. It is a link. So it's going to open up into either, depending on what device you're using, either Google Maps, the app, or a browser that's pulling Google Maps, the website. So it's not the same as the nice embedded map on your page, but even so, these links are very powerful. They can do a lot of different things, and they give you a lot of options on how you can link to useful information on your site. So let's look at some examples. Example number one, let's make a map of a category of things in a specific area. I built a link here that's going to show taco joints in the area code of where our meetup is located at Improving Enterprises in Plano, Texas. As you'll notice in the API, actually, let me give you another view of this API. There we go. Let's look at a couple of things in that link. The first part you recognize, google.com, and then you see maps. Now, if that's all we had there, you would go straight to their whatever default page comes up for Google Maps for you when you go there. But notice we have more. We have search, and then we have a call to an API. That API is the free API. If you aren't calling to that, at least at this point in time, if you aren't calling to that particular number, then you're not calling to the free API. And all of these map URL links that we're going to look at, and any one that you want to build has to start or has to include that. Sometimes they'll have @ question sign, and sometimes just the question sign, but they're all going to have that API equal 1. So that's the first thing I want to highlight there. The second thing is we've got one parameter that we're calling, and it's the query for that search term, tacos near that zip code. So what did this link render as? And I linked to it when I clicked on the link. Wow, look at that. There's a lot of taco joints near where we meet for our meetup. And this is a familiar view to you if you look up a lot of things on Google Maps. And speaking of, you would not be alone by looking up a lot of things. 1 out of 3 searches are location related, location searches on phones. So it's not surprising then that not only is Google monetizing the map APIs for some types of map interactions, but also even on this free version, this free URL that we're able to build and pull up this functionality, they're still monetizing it, because look on the left, you see 2 ads there. Now that's in that section, you have a long list of businesses. Probably most of those businesses that you see a pin on the page are going to show up in that list. But the top ones are ads. And so just kind of as a side note, I have been told by folks in the who are very familiar with what's going on in the SEO world, that right now you could probably get more bang for your buck if you have a location-based business by advertising in those spots right there that you see in Google Maps than you would on just regular search. So if you are able, if you run Google Ads, or you get clients that do, if you are able to maybe leverage AdWords specifically on Google Maps, that might be something you want to look into. I don't know if it's going to be as good of a deal in the future as it is right now, but right now that's what I've been told, you get more bang for your buck advertising in that spot. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. Our second example of a map URL is going to be launching a customized or a tweaked view of what the curb drive up looks like for a location. So for this URL, you'll notice the first part is a little different than the last one. The last one called a search function. This one is calling a map, is calling maps, but notice it is still the same API equals 1, because that's going to be the case, of course, for all these the free map URLs that we're building. This particular URL has 2 parameters. One is for the type of view that we're pulling up, and the other one is for where the view, the location pin, essentially. So let's see what this map URL in this form renders. It renders that. This actually is not a useful view, is it? Where is the building where we have our meetup? And the odd thing is that this road looks like it's empty and desolate, but there's actually quite a few tall office buildings on this route. You just can't see them because of the trees, and they're a little set farther back. So let's change the view so that we can see the building that we have the meetup in, so that newcomers can know what to expect when they pull up. We're going to add a few more parameters to our URL. We're going to add heading, pitch, and field of view. Heading. Think of that as the direction that you're pointing the camera. So north, south, east, west. Those different numbers are going to move that direction around. Pitch, up, literally up and down. You can, from one extreme to the other, you're looking at the sky or you're looking down at the ground. So pitch is important if you're, what you want to focus on is not, it doesn't quite look right in the default. You may want to just tweak that a bit. Field of view is how close your view is to what you're wanting to focus on. I tweaked that for this URL because the default view was, you could still see a lot of the street pavement, and I didn't want to see much of that, so I tweaked that, and let's see what we came up with after those customizations. Ah, there you go. That is so different from this, isn't it? And yet it's the same location. But in this one, we have, through the parameters, we've customized where the camera, which camera shot essentially we're getting and how close we are to it. And by the way, our meeting is at Improving Enterprises, which is in the building on the right. And notice all the great parking that they have. Anyway, so there you go. Let's move on to the next example. Oh, actually, let me highlight one thing on location really quick. So the top URL is the URL that we built with our different parameters. The bottom URL is what was rendered in the browser. Now, really. You could just find exactly what you want in Google Maps, take the rendered URL, and use that as your link in wherever you're going to put a link in your website. But I would say I would recommend going through the extra effort to learn how to build the map URL using the specific parameters, because what if Google at some point changes how they render those, so that 6 months down the line, maybe that link will no longer render the way you think it's going to render, or it might not render at all. So rather than have, the link won't exactly break, it'll just roll over to the default Google Maps page. But rather than have that happen, why don't we just go ahead and build the URL according to the documentation. And besides, it's a lot of fun to play with. I actually found it faster to make small tweaks in my parameter chain options there by putting it in the URL and then just putting that in rather than moving Google Maps around, because after a while, Google Maps moving it around gets a little slow. All right, so let's moving on. Third example is directions. This is a super useful kind of link to have, and if you don't have one on your site to how to find your business, you definitely do want one. The basic, really the only parameter you really need. And by the way, also notice that there is a different phrase after maps. This time it's dir. But anyway, the only parameter you really need for this URL is destination. I added a second one because I could, and I thought that was cool. So I added walking. What would it look? I want to pull up walking directions to where we have our meetup. So let's see how that rendered. There we go. From my office, walking to the, well, actually, I walked to the taco joint close to the meetup. Yeah, 5 hours. Yeah, it could happen. It probably won't. But if I wanted to, there you go. I've got my directions. Another thing you can do with a map URL that gives directions is you can add an origin in. So now I have a starting point, a destination, and I've also specified travel mode. There we go. Let's see how that rendered. There we go. And actually, that's a shorter walk too, isn't it? If I had wanted to specify, if I were in an area where there was a lot of public transportation available, I could specify public transportation mode. Or if I don't specify a mode at all, if you want to take out travel mode, you don't have to put that in. It will default to whatever the user clicking on the link has set in their own Maps app or their browser. Usually it's driving directions, but every once in a while if their last search was on something else, it might actually default to their last travel mode search. Anyway, let's move on. There's a lot more you can do besides just the examples I showed you. I would recommend that you would go check out two places. One is a YouTube video. This is the video of when they made their official announcement and rolled out the Maps URL at Google I/O 2017. If you want to just watch the Maps URL part, you're going to call up the video and go to timestamp about 3 minutes 45 seconds in, and it lasts about 10 minutes, that part of the video. Also, to get a full list of parameters for the different types of calls you can make to that free API, go to the second link, and they've got very easy documentation. Okay, so that's a bit of an overview over the Maps URL, but what about that original problem? We have a map on our website, and it's broken. We get this error message. How do we fix that? Are we really going to have to pony up, or can we have a free solution? And yes, there is a free solution, and it is very simple. you simply do pull a link for a map embed. And this is very similar to getting an embed link for a YouTube video. So there's, we'll step through this really quickly. You pull up the map. You find the share embed map option. I did it from the menu, but you'll see under, of course, on the left, right behind that, excuse me, there's also a share link. So anyway, you get the, you'll be taken here, and you choose your size, and you grab copy HTML and grab that link, and it's going to give you this. It's an iframe link. Now notice that the width and height are set. I chose custom sizes, but whatever one you choose, it's going to come with a set width and height. So that's a problem if you want your embed to be responsive. How do you make it responsive? OS Training has a great tutorial. And on this slide, it's going to be on the right. We have a link to their tutorial. It's super easy, and you can just copy and paste this code from them. First of all, you wrap your iframe in a div with a class, map responsive. And then you grab this CSS code and put it in wherever your theme has or template has you put custom CSS code. And that's it. Now your embedded map is responsive. Let me actually pull over. There we go. Here it is on our home page of our user group right there. And when I make the window smaller, you can see the map adjusts. Now, one thing about height and width, the testing that I did on my Windows PC, Firefox browser and Chrome browser, the width adjusted, the height stayed pretty much constant. On the phone, however, the aspect ratio stayed constant. So you do want to do some testing. It isn't what you choose for your width and height in the iframe code is important. You do want to do some testing. Okay, let's go to the next slide. All right, so we just covered your free options, gave you an overview, and now we're on to the paid section. So why would you need a paid API? Okay, so if you want to do more than just a simple embed like what we just looked at, if you have, then you may want to build yourself a customized experience. If you are using a component, a plugin on your website that has features that you want to keep and continue using, but the plugin now requires you to sign up for an API, then you're going to need to sign up for an API. That if your plugin and component that you're using is still being supported, you can get all the information you need for what you need to sign up for on the API from the developer. If it is no longer being supported, then you are going to probably have to start looking for another solution, or find a way to customize what you have. And if you do take that route, there will probably be other Joomla users who would be very grateful to you for fixing their component for them. Let's move on. There's a link where you would go to sign up. When you go there, you're going to need two things. You're going to need a Google ID, and you're going to need a credit card. Okay, so let's just pause for a moment. I wanted to relate a story that was shared in the meeting. One of the developers in attendance told us a horrifying story about Google's new pricing structure. They had a lot of custom programming and customization going on with their Google Maps that they had on sites. When the new rules came out about what was free and what was not, they made adjustments, they estimated their cost, and they subscribed for the appropriate APIs. But Google also changed their pricing structures. And so when they got their first few bills from Google, they were very different than what they anticipated. They were much, much bigger. The prices were kind of horrifying, and the unfortunate thing was is that they were rather stuck because they couldn't just rip out what they had and start over. They did adjust and work out a solution, but the person on the story who made the recommendation coming out of that experience, the recommendation to others is to keep a very close eye on your traffic and your costs. If you do sign up for an API, take the time to educate for yourself on how it works, have a plan for how you can predict and mitigate costs. Another person in the room recommended look at how you are using that Google Map functionality that you're now having to pay for on your website. Are you using it on every page? If you are, maybe it's not necessary on every page. What if one of your blog posts goes viral and every time somebody pulls it up, you're getting charged for that Google Map in the footer. So, kind of think strategically about where you're going to use the paid stuff, and if you don't need the paid stuff on a certain page or in a certain position, consider maybe using it one of the free alternatives. So you can use a mix of paid and free on your site, and that might help you control costs. Another developer recommended signing up for your API account with a cash-based credit card, like some of the gift cards are structured, or at least a credit card with a low balance, with a low limit. And do this especially if you don't want to spend very much, or if any. And if you're new to the whole paying for the API thing, and the thought is you want to tie it to something with shallow pockets rather than something with deep pockets. Just kind of limit your exposure. And that brings us to the next slide there we go. So you've got your credit card ready, and you've got your Google ID ready, and you can press Get Started, and this is what you're going to see. It wants you to pick your products. So these are different groupings of their APIs for Google Maps. If you don't know which one you need, you probably just need Maps. But better safe than sorry, go check with your plugin developer, see if they can specify that for you. You can also check out some of the pages on the site to kind of learn more about what those different groupings are. Right under that, on the landing page, the second section down is this right here, and it takes you to the different types of APIs where you can learn more. There's also, they've got a great documentation page. You can, you can see the map section here. If you scroll down this page, you could also see the routes and the places. But you can also type in the APIs that you're interested in learning about, and they'll come up. It's got a great documentation section. Okay, once you're signed up, you can manage your APIs from your console. And those are some of the things you can do. Let's look at some screenshots. Here's a screenshot of the overview in your console. In this particular account, we've only signed up for one API, the Maps JavaScript API, and frankly, for some of your components and plugins, that may be the only one you need. Let's assume that is, and we're going to then go to the second tab on the left, to the API list, where we have our enabled APIs, and then we have optional additional APIs we could subscribe to if we wanted to. Instead, we're going to just click on that one that we have enabled, and that's going to take us to the info screen for that one. And here we have more information about it that we can drill down into. Metrics on how it's performing. This one is not on a live site yet at the point in time the screenshot was taken, so there's not much to see. But if we wanted to set a budget, we have quotas up there that we could do that in. What I've circled here is the Credentials tab. If you clicked on that, you would see the key. And you can just grab that key and put it in where the component wants you to put it. And for that scenario, if you needed a key for a component, that you just got it, you put it in, you're good to go. You're done. Now you just have to kind of maybe keep an eye on your costs. Here's one more screenshot on metrics, and also a place where you can, and you'll notice on the bottom right, you can kind of keep an eye on errors. So that's about that for the console. If you are a developer who's wanting to build something custom, or you're wanting to rebuild something you've done before to kind of adjust to the new ecosystem of the paid APIs, then I would recommend, let's pull that screen back up. I'd recommend to start here at the documentation and give yourself plenty of time to learn about what you need. Maybe my limited experience with them has been when you sign up for one API, they're really going to try to encourage you to sign up for related ones. You may not need them. So this is where your homework starts if you're going to go that route. And if you have questions, I'm not sure I could answer them, but go ahead and ask, and maybe we can route you to somebody who has hit that same challenge before. Speaking of questions, let me go back to the final slide. You can DM me on Twitter, or you can leave a comment with your question on our Meetup page. One of the questions that was asked in the chat during the meeting was on various, people had questions on different components, that whether or not they required an API. And one particularly, somebody asked about hotshots by, I think it's Joomla.com or Joomla. Anyway, that one I do believe needs an API, and it is the API that we showed here, the Maps JavaScript API. But again, if you have that on your site, do reach out to the developer. That one's still being actively maintained, and they would be able to give you specific details of what you need for your installation. All right, so that's it for this part of the presentation for Monday's meeting. Thank you very much for tuning in.